good evening to you folks. Good evening to you. You all remember me. I'm Billy Hahn.
I am Julia Bragdon Parsons. I didn't have to wear one of these in my day.
And we're all here, but you ain't because of the COVID. And we're still going to do all of our stories for you just like always.
At your service.
And this year it's all about suffrage and women's rights and empowerment. Julia's right here. She can tell you how she feels about it.
I was born in 1822 and died in 1868, so I wasn't around during this time of the vote. I don't think I would have voted. I liked my life the way it was. I didn't have to make any decisions. So I'm not on the fence any longer. I think I'd vote against it. Oh, then I said vote. I think I'd have my husband vote against it.
Oh. Well, so anyway, folks, you come on in. We're ready for you. Come on in. Don't be scared. Come on in, enjoy. And don't forget, if you want to, at the beginning or at the end, you can make a donation to Spirits Alive to help us keep the cemetery growing. Okay? So come on in, folks, and enjoy yourselves. Come on in.
So, you've come to disturb us, have you? Well, you've come on an auspicious night. I hope you know your flowers. Flowers, yes. Tonight's journey is all about the flowers. Narcissus, asphodel, rosa, rubignosa. Richest country on earth, and you still don't know your Latin. Well, things are as bad as when I was here. Well, the names. I say they are the yellow jonquil and the ruby red rose. And I am John Neal, at your service. Yes, John Neal. Editor, writer, publisher, commentator, community critic, community crank, some called me. Yes, in life I was editor of the Yankee, a sprightly sheet. Yes, and in it I observed, I commentated, I criticized about Portland town, for which I was roundly abused. Ahead of my time, said my friends. I had a few. Noisy rapscallions, said my foes. I had many. But it was I, John Neal, who built the first gymnasium in old Portland town atop yonder Mount Joy's hill, and there I taught physical culture to white men and black men. Yes, white and black, side by side. White men, black men, equal, I say. A black man has all the rights of a white man, said I. It was I who first published the works of that fellow from Baltimore, a fine poet, poor fellow, Eddie Poe. Yes, Eddie Poe. You watch. Keep that name in mind. You shall hear of him again, mark my word. 'Twas I, John Neal, who spoke at the very first Women's Right Convention held in all of the United States of America, Seneca Falls, New York, July 1848. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights, and men and women enjoy them, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Aye, so we wrote, Declaration of Sentiments, July 1848. Much good did it do us then or now. You, sir, you disagree with me, sir. I believe that one day women shall actually have the vote. You disagree. You shall be sleeping in the barn tonight, I perceive. Well, much good it did us in 1848. Not a single woman of my time lived long enough to cast one ballot. Oh, that was a moment for the future, the far future, way in the future of the 20th century, when it finally took flowers again. In that time, the yellow jonquil, the daffodil, symbolized women's right to vote, and the ruby red rose were those who were its foes. Yes, at that distant time in the 20th century, another veritable War of the Roses, the Yorkists versus the Lancashires. Yes, War of the Roses, 1471 to 1483. England? Shakespeare? Never mind. The march of human rights takes time. The tide goes in, the tide goes out, but the march must be ever forward. I see you as you see me, through a glass, darkly, images of what was and what might be. I say it shall take all of us, men, women, equal, black, whites, equal, immigrants, newcomers, natives, equal. Only with these shall all of us build the new America. I ramble. In life, I was a lawyer. Prithee, forgive me for that. I have something for you. Will one brave soul please step forward? The yellow jonquil, a thing so small for a hope so big. As in the tides of humankind, forward and back go the motion, but always toward the future. Bear that with you upon the journey you must take this night through the darkness to the end of your journey. Hold it dear, like a principle to the heart, and that will see you safe through your journey tonight. Much like life in that respect. So, be off with you upon your journey. The night grows dark. If perchance you see my cousin, Lydia Neal Dennett, tell her that Cousin John is being good. She will not believe you. Be gone! Be on your journey! Be gone!
Welcome to Greeley's Tavern. Alice Greeley, proprietor, at your service. Now, I have a message for what... I said I have a message for... Oh, pipe down. I can't hear myself think. That's better. Now, who will take this yellow jonquil? Good. See that Augusta Hunt gets that symbol of women's suffrage. They tell me that pro-suffrage wore the yellow jonquil and anti-suffrage the red rose. Oh, you know, suffrage. That means voting. Tonight, we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of us women getting the vote. Now, I wouldn't know too much about that myself, as I did die in 1795, but I do know something about being a woman. So here I am. Oh. You know, back in my day, elections were public affairs. Oh, true, election day was a time to weigh in on, political opinion, but it was also a time of planned carousing, good fellowship, and noise. Oh. You see, back then, men didn't vote by secret ballot, but by voice. In other words, It was bloody chaos. Oh, and how the drink did flow. 'Twas a poor candidate who did not provide good grog for the participants. Why, I heard one story about our first president. You see, back then, they say that when candidate Washington was running for the Virginia House of Burgesses, he plied the voters with 47 gallons of beer, 35 gallons of wine, 2 gallons of cider, 3.5 pints of brandy, and 70 gallons of rum punch. Oh, he did carry that election by 310 votes, of course. Oh, yeah, the Greeleys did love election days. The coin flowing into our coffers brought us through some hard times, to be sure. Why, that winter of 1775 was the hardest. That was the winter that Captain Mowat, of His Majesty King George's ship, the Canco, fired its guns and burnt this city to the ground. 400 buildings turned to ash overnight. They wanted me to leave with everyone else, but I stayed. I kept the yard wet. I even picked up a hot cannonball with my frying pan, and I threw it right back at the British. When the rains finally came, Greeley's Tavern was still standing right there on the corner of India Street. You know, I took over that tavern after my husband passed in 1758. Tavern keeping was one of the few jobs allowed to women back then. So rather than go on the public welfare, I decided to keep the tavern going. Never let it be said that strong drink tears a family apart. 'Twas drink that kept the Greeley family together. Oh. Of course, most women aren't so lucky, as according to the law, married women, once they're married, don't count as a separate person no more, and all they own belong to their husband. Covertry, they calls it. Thievery, I calls it. But I suppose a widow does have a mite more leeway. Well, new laws were written, of course, after we threw off the king's tyranny. But not much changed for us women. Oh, except in New Jersey. Women in New Jersey did have the right to vote from 1776 to 1807 under certain circumstances. You see, only single women and widows could vote, as according to their law, married women could own no property. Well, I suppose had my husband been a different kind of man, I would not have turned out so well as it did. Then again, since he did take my advice on all matters, like he should, I reckon I would have had the last say anyhow. Oh, now, it's about time you lot got going down the path there. The other ladies and, a gentleman or two will be waiting to tell you about the real struggles. Now, safe travels, friends.
Good evening. I am Lillian Marilla Ames Stevens. Please take this jonquil and present it to Augusta Hunt, my friend and sister in the struggle for temperance and women's suffrage. Thank you. There is a temperance fountain in Portland. A young girl holds out a cup overflowing with pure water. To me, Her cup is the heart, holding out the water of hope to those that need it most. I was born in 1843 in Dover, Maine. My dear mother passed away when I was 14, but she had instilled in me a strong desire to live in imitation of Jesus Christ. My father remarried, but he died 2 years later of consumption. I was an orphan at 16. Grief can bring insight if you open your heart. As I prayed, I thought of all the children who were orphaned not by death, but by the curse of alcohol. Now I know what you're thinking. The temperance movement was started by old fuddy-duddies who hate to see folks having a good time. Bigots who look down on the Irish and Italians, for whom the making of beer and wine are beloved traditions. But I have seen too many families torn asunder by men's passion for drink to stand by while women and children suffer from abuse, poverty, and shame. I was in favor of anything that would improve the lot of poor women. Why, if women gained the vote, we might even achieve a constitutional amendment, banning the sale of alcohol entirely. In 1851, Portland Mayor Neil Dow passed a prohibition law in Maine. Other states soon followed with their own versions of the Maine Law, as it was called. Years later, Mr. Dow and I became colleagues, and working together, we finally inserted a prohibition amendment into the Maine state constitution. I had two dear companions in the struggle, my husband and devoted ally Michael, and Frances Willard, who became my mother, my sister, and my friend. I met Frances Willard in 1874. I had traveled with my daughter to Old Orchard Beach to hear Miss Willard speak at a temperance rally. We were instantly drawn to each other. Our friendship endured until her death. Not long afterwards, that same year in fact, in Cleveland, Ohio, the National Women's Christian Temperance Union was formed, and Frances Willard was elected president. The next year, Maine followed suit with the Maine Women's Christian Temperance Union. Frances had a motto: do everything. Well, I did my best. When Frances passed away in 1898, I took her place as president of the National Women's Christian Temperance Union, a position I held until my own death in 1914. Well, there is so much more I could tell you, but my time here is almost done. But next time you go to the Portland Public Library, take a moment to visit the Little Water Girl. This fountain was donated to the city by the National Women's Christian Temperance Union to honor my status as a benefactor of Portland. But as you gaze upon this symbol of innocence and purity, think not of me, but of all those women who worked unselfishly for the betterment of women in Maine and beyond. God bless you.
Good evening, and God bless all, except the cat. James McGlinchey here, but you may call me Big Jim. There's a fine night here in the old burying ground, and isn't it a grand old nation that has treated me family so well? When I followed my brother Patrick here in 1841, we swore that we were not going to end up like all the other wretched bog trotters who made the crossing with nary a cent to their name. We had a bit of capital and a plan. Our father had been a fair successful distiller of poitín, the national Irish spirit, and it was our intention to bring that craft to America. We opened the Forest City Brewery in Cape Elizabeth in 1858. at our second brewery on 4th Street in Portland, and set about our goal of making money. This was no easy feat, for in 1851, the state of Maine had passed a law prohibiting the sale of alcohol. The law was no impediment to the McGlincheys. We sold our product to Massachusetts and to New Hampshire, all above board, you see. You're probably wondering what I am after here on the 100th anniversary of ladies getting the vote. You have heard from Mr. Neal, a fine friend to the Irish in Portland, and the spirited Mrs. Greeley. I wish I had known her. You've also met the good Mrs. Stevens, a true Christian woman to be sure, but her philosophy was quite a detriment to my livelihood. Anyone who says that ladies are powerless without the vote has never been raised in the home with an Irish mother. Now, Da may have put the roof over our heads, but under that roof, Ma was queen. Now, how could she have kept order in her own home if she had after having to be worried about the troubles of everyone else? Giving the vote to women would have been a slap in the face of the Virgin Mary herself. And haven't the McGlincheys been fine friends and helpers to ladies? The wealth that we made through hard graft enabled our daughters to get top educations. Mrs. Greeley has told us that it was the custom to hold elections in taverns. Now, if ladies had had the vote, what man would have dared bring one into a saloon to shout out their ayes and nays like a mob of unruly fishwives? I shudder to think of it. Roaring and bellowing in a pub is the very opposite of ladylike behavior. Don't you agree? Well, Mrs. Stevens had a ready answer to that. She would have changed the way that we voted. Instead of bringing important issues to a public airing in the friendly confines of a gathering place, with a toast to seal the bargain, she would have had us conduct elections by secret ballot. In the name of women's suffrage, she would have led us on the path to tyranny and repression. I am told that we are to give the floral symbol of suffrage to Mrs. Hunt. This puts me in a pickle. How am I to fulfill my duties as a gentleman and not betray my deeply held beliefs? Never let it be said that Big Jim McGlinchey couldn't rise to the occasion. Give this red rose to the good lady. Mrs. Hunt will understand its meaning. Safe journeys. 'Tis the last rose of summer, blooming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone.
How glad I am to see you here tonight. My name is Lydia Neal Dennett, and I was a knight in the crusade for women's suffrage. In that spirit, I offer my sword to my Lady Augusta Hunt. As the bloom unfurls from the seed, so did women's suffrage grow out of the fertile soil of abolition. My cousin John Neal was fond of quoting John Stuart Mill. During the abolition movement, those who were against slavery were regarded as fanatics. So too, would the public tide turn toward women's suffrage? Time would tell. Even before the suffrage movement gained traction, my friends and I were no strangers to risk. Before the war between the states, my husband and I provided aid and shelter to escaping slaves on the Underground Railroad. Had we been caught, we faced a fine of $2,000 and 12 months in jail, maybe even the loss of our homes. Sometimes the threat was far more immediate. In 1842, the anti-slavery movement held a lecture with abolitionists Mr. Foster and Mr. Spear at the First Parish Church in Portland. Straight away, the threats began. No racist from New Hampshire or reformer from Boston is going to preach in this church about ending slavery. When our speakers arrived, the mob pounced. They ripped the clothes from Mr. Foster, clubbed and beat him. Using our hoop skirts as a barrier, we escorted the men inside. Now the mob was pounding on the door. We were able to help Mr. Foster escape out the back window, but Mr. Spear was not so lucky. Thinking the mob had gone, Mr. Spear opened the front door. They dragged him into the street and beat him nearly to death. Somehow we managed to carry both men to my house on Spring Street, where they were slowly nursed back to health. My comrades and I never stopped driving towards the emancipation of women, but we agreed to put our goals on hold until the war against slavery was won. After that, we redoubled our efforts. In 1872, I led the first petition in Maine regarding the women's vote. In that same year, I filed the first Indigenous suffrage petition at the Maine State Legislature. In that same year, the Maine Women's Suffrage Association was formed with both male and female leadership. Cousin John Neal was our first president. After the war, cracks in our movement threatened to become chasms. To our shame, the cause was not free of racism. Some in the movement were bitter when black men gained the vote before white women. Even Susan B. Anthony resorted to bigotry and fear-mongering, and our black sisters were all but forgotten. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act passed almost 50 years later that black women were able to exercise their right to vote. I died in 1881, the work unfinished. There would be setbacks in the road ahead, but I had faith that others would continue the fight. I leave you with the words of my dear friend and fellow abolitionist, John Greenleaf Whittier. Success is failure turned inside out. The silver tint in the clouds of doubt, and you never can tell just how close you are. It may be near when it feels so far. So stick to the fight when your hardest hit. It's when things get worse that you must not quit.
Good evening, my fellow Maine citizens. My name is Frederick Hale. I was U.S. Senator from 1917 to 1941. It was I who cast the vote, the deciding vote in favor of the 19th Amendment when the outcome hung in the balance. Moved as I was by the heartfelt and the tearful pleas of Maine's women, I voted for ratification. Of course, I would have done so anyway, moved as I was by the cause of the suffragists. It is my understanding that Mrs. Hunt will have the last word. With that in mind, I would like you to convey to her a token of my esteem. Please take this fragrant bloom of suffrage and present it to her when you have the privilege of encountering her on this night of celebration. Now, my detractors would have you believe that it was Representative Henry Burns of Kentucky who cast the vote which led to majority and victory. They will tell you that I waited until the outcome was no longer in doubt before casting my vote in favor. That is a scurrilous attempt to change my legacy. History may tar me with the blackest brush, but I ask you this. If I am the mugwump history has painted me, how on earth did I get elected to the U.S. Senate for 24 years? Now that I've defended my credentials as a supporter of women's rights, it is time to tell you about Mrs. Clarence Hale. She was married to Judge Clarence Hale, and a more virtuous woman than my Aunt Margaret you could not hope to find if you lived to be 100. Mrs. Hale sends her regrets. To be frank, she is in no mood to celebrate tonight. My aunt was a fierce opponent of women's suffrage. She wrote several pithy pamphlets, such as this, against women suffrage. She has asked me to read to you some highlights. Anything to keep peace in the family. I will paraphrase for the sake of brevity. 1. Suffrage is being demanded by a minority of women. Last I looked, this government was based on majority rule. 2. Political life goes against women's nature. Women's supreme disinterest is unquestioned when she has no political favors to ask, nor none to bestow. 3. Were the time and means expended on women's campaigns for the last 60 years be instead spent for charitable purposes, humanity's needs would be better advanced. And 4. Any change in our constitutional method of government should first be proven to be of advantage to all of us. Women's suffrage, wherever it has been tried on the state level, has failed to do this. Colorado has let women vote for the last 21 years. Denver, Colorado, now under the rule of women's suffrage, should be the joy of the whole earth. It is instead one of the most corrupt cities in the country. Well, I will let Aunt Margaret's arguments stand or fall on their own merit. However, I cannot hope but comment on the 4th point, the positive or the negative effects of women's voting. It is of no matter how women vote. It is important in the end only that they can and they do
Vote.
Thank you, living ladies and gentlemen, for listening to my little speech. Now, go forth and
Vote.
Good evening. My name is Augusta Hunt, and I was the first woman to cast a ballot in the state of Maine. As one who was actively involved in the struggle for 50 years, I am proud to be part of tonight's celebration. Oh my! Are those flowers for me? Why, thank you so much. How lovely. Aren't these daffodils lovely? Jonquils. Please inform Mr. McGlinchey that the red rose has been voted down. Women have no more time for the thorns of oppression. I have 2 regrets in life: that none of the suffrage pioneers lived long enough to vote, and that I never met my literary hero, Charles Dickens. Although I have met him since, and I was delighted to discover that Mr. Dickens shares my love of the game of bridge. They say that bridge is particularly attractive to those with a scrappy disposition. How true. We women made our opening bid in the 1840s. At first, our opponents took most of the tricks. But a good strategist is one who knows how to bide her time. It is all about the long game. I was born in Portland in 1842. When I was 21, I married George S. Hunt, a prosperous merchant with the West Indies shipping interests. My husband's company operated 21 ships and 2 sugar refineries. The ships sailed to Cuba and returned with sugar cane, which was then refined and used in the distilling of rum. Oh, the passionate debates George and I had on that subject. Whenever I would berate him for adding to the alcohol problem, George said how grateful he was that the evil effects of his money were balanced by my spending so much of it to put him out of business. George died in 1896, and after that hardly a day went by when I didn't long to engage in one more verbal joust with him. After George's death, I devoted all of my time to improving the lives of women and children. I was a founding member of the Maine Women's Christian Temperance Union. For decades, my comrades and I campaigned for full voting rights for women through the Maine state legislature. Year after year, our efforts failed. Nevertheless, we persisted. At last, on August 18th, 1920, we prevailed. The Maine state legislature ratified the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, granting women the right to vote. As for Senator Hale, all I can say is, a good bridge partner is one who is not afraid of taking risks. Thanks to the hard work of my predecessors, women can accomplish anything we put our minds to. Just ask my great-great-granddaughter, the famous actress Helen Hunt. What a great responsibility it was to be the first among us to vote. As I cast my ballot, I felt the hands of my comrades resting upon my own. I shall soon become the first spirit to vote in this year's presidential election. Of course, my vote will not be counted among the living, but I hope that my example will inspire all of you to exercise your right to vote. For whom did I vote? The last I heard, voting was done by secret ballot. Good night.